This episode is brought to you by Michelob Ultra. Michelob Ultra is perfect for more than just the summer heat this year, because not only is it refreshing and crisp with only 95 calories, but Ultra is also the official beer sponsor of Team USA at the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Celebrate every point, race, and moment with Team USA and Michelob Ultra for the Olympic Games Paris 2024. Stock up on Michelob Ultra and cheer on Team USA. Enjoy responsibly. Copyright 2024 Anheuser-Busch Michelob Ultra Light Beer, St. Louis, Missouri.
If you want to listen to this episode ad-free, you can do so by subscribing on Apple Podcasts or heading over to patreon.com/The Murder Diaries Pod. On Spotify, just search The Murder Diaries ad-free.
Welcome to The Murder Diaries. I'm Natalie.
And I'm Paige.
Boys Town is a small neighborhood for Chicago. But for the LGBTQ plus community, it means big things. The largest queer community in the Midwest and one of the oldest in the United States, the neighborhood is a stone's throw from Lake Michigan. It's known for its nightclubs, cute coffee shops, and boutiques, as well as being a safe place for members of the queer community to live. Safety. That's what Kevin Clewer was seeking when he moved to Boys Town after realizing that living as a gay man in his hometown of Rockford could be anything but. His family breathed a sigh of relief when he moved into a community that was open and accepting and loved Kevin for who he was, just like his family did. But this illusion of safety was dashed when Kevin was murdered and his family began a decades-long search for Fernando, the elusive man believed to hold the key to the case. This is Kevin's story.
Used to think it's in my head, but I'm walking with the dead.
Kevin James Clewer was born on April 7th, 1972, in Hammond, Indiana, to parents Jim and Pam, and joining their oldest son, Ron, making the Clewers a family of 4. Ron was 7 years older than Kevin, and he told the Unsolved Mysteries podcast that they were close when Ron was little. But when he became a teen, he had different priorities. But once Kevin became a teenager, they rediscovered the closeness they had as children. Ron described his brother as fun-loving, outgoing, and social, saying he was a fun guy who enjoyed life and liked to be around people, cook, and entertain folks. With his infectious smile and laugh, he brought people together and made them feel comfortable and wanted. When Kevin was 15, he came out as gay, first to his mom, who was very accepting, and then to Ron and his wife. Pam and Jim had divorced some years before, and when he told his stepmom that he was gay, she was also supportive. But he told his dad last because he was worried about how he might react. And while Jim did struggle to understand at first, he ended up being accepting and later became an advocate for inclusion. When Kevin was in his 20s, he was offered a job as a cost analyst at Flextronics. It's an electronic manufacturing company, and the position was based in Chicago. So he moved to the Boys Town neighborhood and moved into an apartment on the 3400 block of North Elaine Place that he eventually shared with a roommate. Kevin decided to move to the area because, as a gay man, he wanted to live somewhere where he could be comfortable being himself. As I mentioned in the introduction, Boys Town is known as one of the most inclusive queer communities in the U.S. The community has a lot of LGBTQ plus run businesses and is one of the safest neighborhoods in the city. Kevin's brother Ron also told the Unsolved Mysteries podcast of times that Kevin was not made to feel safe and accepted in his hometown of Rockford, which is also what prompted the move. Ron was relieved because he felt being in a community with other gay people would be safer for his brother. Although the move meant that they didn't see each other as often, Kevin spoke to his family frequently and told them of his desire to settle down and buy a house in his neighborhood. Being a social person, Kevin loved spending time with people. So it wasn't unusual when he went out clubbing with friends on the night of March 23rd, 2004. After having dinner at his apartment with a friend and his roommate, Kevin and the friend headed out. And if you're wondering why the roommate didn't join them, that's because he had work the next day and had to be up early. So he decided to call it a night and stay in. But let's get back to Kevin. He went to Roscoe's and Little Jim's, clubs that were within a short walk of his centrally located apartment. As for Kevin's roommate, he heard voices in the early hours of the morning, but he didn't know how many people had come back to the apartment. Dozing in and out of sleep, he heard the apartment door click closed at around 4 a.m., but he couldn't tell if it was from people arriving or leaving. He soon fell back asleep until it was time to get ready for work, leaving around 6:30 a.m., not noticing anything amiss. Sure, Kevin's door was closed, but that wasn't odd. He did note the dining room window was open, but the screen was up. And the fact that they lived on the 3rd floor meant that there wasn't much risk of anyone breaking in that way. Now, Kevin was supposed to pick up clients at the airport that day, but he never showed up. He was a dedicated and reliable employee, and not showing up was completely out of character. So his work called his emergency contact, his mom, Pam. Pam then called Ron and Jim, Kevin's dad, and according to the Unsolved Mysteries podcast, Jim lived about 45 minutes away from the city. So he was the closest and able to get to the apartment quicker than anyone else. Jim headed over to the apartment, arriving around 6 p.m. He saw Kevin's car was there, so he buzzed the apartment, but there was no answer. He buzzed a neighbor who then let him up, and Jim went and knocked loudly on the apartment door, but again, there was no answer. Determined to check on his son, Jim broke down the door and made his way to Kevin's bedroom. And that's where he found the body of his 31-year-old son, Kevin Clewer, covered in blood. An autopsy would later show that Kevin had been stabbed more than 40 times. A March 25th Chicago Tribune article reported that Kevin appeared to have died shortly before his father arrived at the apartment. However, his family disputes this, because his brother Ron told the Unsolved Mysteries podcast that when Jim touched Kevin's body, it was cold. The police soon arrived and secured the crime scene. And that's when they noticed there were no signs of forced entry, which indicates that the killer was let into the apartment. While some sources say that a knife was found nearby, there was no follow-up reporting on this in the media. And we can assume that it was not the murder weapon and therefore unrelated to the case. Police collected drinking glasses hoping to get the killer's fingerprints or DNA from them. Since there were no signs of forced entry, it was only logical to assume that the killer could have been invited in and had a drink. There were also items missing from the bedroom, which suggested a robbery had occurred, but the room itself wasn't tossed, meaning that the robber had taken things that were in plain view or that Kevin was wearing. Potential witnesses were interviewed. All of Kevin's friends cooperated fully with police and told them everything they knew in the hopes that something would be helpful. Even Kevin's roommate told the police about the voices and noises he heard that night. Nothing that sounded unusual or concerning, and nothing was amiss in the apartment before he left for work. The roommate didn't hear anything that sounded like an attack or an assault that night. He even gave his DNA to the police, underwent a polygraph, and was absolutely distraught about what had happened to Kevin. The police, as they're known to do, developed a theory that Kevin had met someone while out at a bar and he had invited that man over to his apartment. There was evidence of sexual intercourse, which appeared consensual, and of course, the previously mentioned missing items. Investigators were unclear if robbery was the initial motive or if something happened that caused the killer to snap and murder Kevin. Now, remember that name I mentioned at the top of the episode, Fernando? This is where he comes in. The friends who were with Kevin that night at the clubs said that Kevin had been talking with someone called Fernando at Roscoe's. However, they said it was highly unlikely that Fernando is his real name, but that's what he was going by that night. The friend said he saw Kevin and another friend leave the bar around 3:15 a.m. with Fernando to go to Little Jim's, which was about a block away. It was then reported that Kevin and Fernando left Little Jim's together to go back to Kevin's place. Their voices may be the ones that the roommate heard around 4 a.m.
We're so excited to launch our journal entries series. You can listen ad-free to the journal entries series by joining our Patreon at patreon.com/themurderdiariespod or subscribing on Apple. If you're on Spotify, you can also search The Murder Diaries ad-free and listen there.
So you're probably wondering what journal entries are. And if you've ever had a bestie, you know that you can be on the phone with them forever. Or at least that's how Paige and I's relationship is. We can be on the phone with each other for 45 minutes and not even blink an eye. So that's what these journal entries are. They're going to be things we're reading, watching, and just shooting the shit with each other. That was kind of gross sounding, but So join us. We can't wait to have you there.
For $2.99, you can join us ad-free. Again, head over to Patreon, search The Murder Diaries ad-free on Spotify, or subscribe on Apple. We'll see you there. Bye.
So the big question is, who the heck is Fernando? Unfortunately, not much is known about him, not even his real name. According to a CBS article, if we're to believe it, Fernando was a known Boys Town hustler and escort. Whereas another article, if we're to believe that one, says he was a busboy at a restaurant off I-55 and 83. As you can see, there's conflicting reports. Investigators worked with what they had to track him down. He's described as being a white Hispanic man around 25 years old, 5'7", with a slim, athletic build, who spoke with a Hispanic or European Spanish accent. Fernando was then named a person of interest in the case. While Kevin's friend and another man who was at the bar the night of the murder helped police with the sketch, it wasn't released right away. They didn't want to scare Fernando away and instead chose to go to the local bars looking for the man matching the picture. The sketch of him was eventually released on April 7th, along with a police community alert warning people not to let strangers into their home. Here's the thing, though. Kevin wasn't the only man to have been killed in the area. Leaders in Chicago's gay community openly criticized the police's handling of Kevin's case, saying that it took them too long to issue the alert about a possible threat to the community and to release the sketch. And after the sketch was released, police started getting tips and leads. Multiple people were interviewed and DNA samples were taken from those who matched the description of Fernando. But nothing matched.
We're going to pause Kevin's story here, just for a moment, to talk about the other two murders that happened around the same time as Kevin's that bore striking similarities.
6 months earlier, on August 17, 2003, 38-year-old Brad Nelson Winters, a theater director, was bar hopping on Halstead Street, the same street that Kevin had been on the night he was murdered. He was with a friend most of the night, and she said goodbye as she got into a cab. After stopping for cigarettes, he was never seen again. When he didn't show up for work at his job at Northwestern University on the 19th, a coworker went to his apartment to check in on him. And it was there in Brad's Lincoln Park apartment, the coworker found him, naked and covered in stab wounds. An autopsy showed that he had been strangled, had multiple blows to the head, and 24 stab wounds. The funeral director told WBBM radio that Brad suffered wounds of torture. When police investigated the crime scene, they found that the back door was open and Brad's wallet and cell phone were gone, indicating that robbery could have been a motive. Again, like in Kevin's case, there were no signs of forced entry, so the police assumed that Brad had let his killer in. They took blood samples from the living room and bathtub, as well as scrapings from under Brad's fingernails in the hopes that they were able to get some of the killer's DNA. Investigators then spoke to neighbors to see if someone or anyone had seen or heard anything that would help the investigation. The neighbor in the apartment next door to Brad said that around 3 or 4 a.m., they heard a shout. It was difficult for the neighbor to make out what exactly was said, but they thought the words somebody and help could be heard coming from downstairs. Obviously, this startled the neighbor, but the noise eventually stopped and they thought it was just college kids walking past and yelling things. After he decided it was probably kids messing around, he went back to sleep. Another neighbor across the alley said she heard someone say, "Help me," at a similar time. Unfortunately, she too never made a call to the police. The investigation into Brad's murder continued, but with no leads or witnesses because the police didn't have much to go on. So in terms of timeline, first there was Brad, then there was Kevin, and 5 months after Kevin's murder, another man was killed. On October 31st, 2004, Charles Gibson, who was known to his friends as Chuck, was found stabbed to death in his condo on the 1000 block of West Balmoral Avenue in Edgewater. It's an area not far from where Kevin and Brad had been murdered. Charles worked at Gage Park High School as a special education teacher, and he was the kind of person who kept in touch with his friends. Friends of Charles hadn't heard from him, so they asked police to conduct a welfare check. Just like in Brad's case, Charles was found naked. The condo was covered in blood, and a 7-inch knife was recovered from the scene. And it was around this time that people started to wonder if the crimes were connected. How could they not? All 3 men were living in a similar area, and all 3 were openly gay. All 3 men had frequented the same Boys Town bars and clubs. However, in November of 2004, the police announced that they didn't think the crimes were connected and that it was all just one big coincidence that all of the men were gay, living in close proximity, and were killed around the same time.
A 6-person team was assigned to investigate the murders.
Then in late November, police announced that they had solved one of the 3 murders. Blood found at the scene of Charles's murder matched a man called Ollie Rockman. During the attack, Rockman had cut himself and left his DNA behind. According to investigators, Rockman and Charles had met at Charlie, a gay country-themed bar, on October 22nd. That night, the pair went to Charles's place, and it was reported that they parted ways amicably. On the night of October 30th, they met again at a Boys Town bar and went back to Charles' condo again, where a fight ensued and Charles was killed. Some witness accounts also say that Rockman was looking for Charles in the condo building, but it's not really clear where this fits into the timeline. The witnesses were able to provide enough info for a sketch to be made. They also said that the man wore an ID card in a leather holder around his neck. Rockman was later identified by the witnesses who saw him in the building that night in a photo lineup, and he was picked up by police as he was leaving Mount Sinai Hospital. As a side note, his hospital visit was unrelated to the cut he sustained during the attack. Police were quick to confirm that Rockman was only suspected of this murder and wasn't a person of interest in Brad or Kevin's slayings. Rockman had a criminal history that included being convicted for indecent liberties with a child in 1972 and 1976. In 1978, he was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to 28 years in prison. He was then paroled in 1991. Although coverage of this case is hard to find after the initial reporting of the arrest, we were able to find that Ollie Rockman died in prison of blood cancer in 2015. So we can assume that he was convicted for Charles's murder. While Charles's murder was solved quickly, it would be more than a decade before the next of the 3 crimes was solved. Then in 2016, DNA collected from Brad Winter's murder matched Ramon Smith. Smith had been arrested in Texas and was convicted on a drug charge. Upon his arrest, his DNA was taken and entered into the system where it matched to the sample collected during the initial investigation into Brad's murder. The blood in Brad's living room and bathtub, as well as the material found under Brad's fingernails. According to the Chicago Tribune, Smith has an extensive criminal history with convictions for aggravated robbery, assault, prostitution, and theft. After being extradited back to Chicago, Smith pled guilty to Brad's murder and was sentenced to 24 years in prison. No motive was ever given. The earliest Smith can be paroled is October 17th, 2040, and he'll be in his mid-60s by then.
With 2 of the 3 murders solved, Kevin's brother Ron hoped that Kevin's would be next. You guys have heard us tell you a million times by now that Shopify has taken the cash register online, helping millions sell billions around the world. But we want to remind you again, Shopify can do the same thing at your retail store. Give your point of sale system a serious upgrade with Shopify.
Like Paige mentioned, you've heard us talk about Shopify's POS system for a while now. So make it your command center for your retail store. From accepting payments to managing inventory, Shopify has everything you need to sell in person. With Shopify, you get a powerhouse selling partner that effortlessly unites your in-person and online sales into one source of truth. Track every sale across your business in one place and know exactly what's in stock. Connect with customers inline and online. Shopify helps you drive store traffic with plug-and-play tools built for marketing campaigns from TikTok to Instagram and beyond.
With Shopify, you'll also be getting hardware that fits your business. Take your payments by smartphone, transform your tablet into a point-of-sale system, or use Shopify's POS Go mobile device for a battle-tested solution. On top of all of that, Shopify's award-winning help will be there to support you and your success every step of the way. Do retail right with Shopify.
Sign up for a $1 per month trial period at shopify.com/murderdiaries, all lowercase. Go to shopify.com/murderdiaries to take your retail business to the next level today. That's shopify.com/murderdiaries.
Unfortunately, both Jim and Pam passed away around a year after their son's murder. Pam from a cancer that spread quickly to her organs, and Jim from a heart attack a few weeks later. They were both just 56 years old. In the space of a year, Ron had lost his entire immediate family. In the aftermath of Kevin's death, the Clewers threw themselves into the case, determined to get justice. Ron said that the first few weeks were a roller coaster, with police seeming to be close to a resolution 1 minute and then back to square one the next. They offered up $20,000 as a reward fund. Although the reward led to a lot of tips, none of them were viable, so Jim and Pam withdrew the reward. Pam and Jim went to Boys Town every week to hand out flyers and look for leads right up until their deaths. After the passing of his parents, Ron took over and continued to fight for justice for Kevin. In March of 2013, he told the media that the Morton College Institute for Cold Case Solution in Cicero was looking into the case. And around the same time, a former veteran Chicago police violent crimes detective and the Morton College Institute's executive director released information that had been previously unknown to the public. He said that the police had been able to identify and track down Fernando at some stage during the investigation. Fernando was then questioned and passed a polygraph before being released. During the police inquiry into Fernando, they concluded that he was a material witness rather than a suspect. So after a few days of questioning, they had no cause to hold him. It would later be reported that this wasn't true and was based on rumors. The police later said that although they had indeed spoken to several men named Fernando, they hadn't identified the Fernando. The executive director continued saying that he believes that another person known to police should be investigated. The person was questioned by police and was with Kevin the night of the murder. He added, "It's clear now that they didn't try very hard," in reference to the initial investigation, and said that the case is solvable. But he declined to comment further, not wanting to jeopardize his relationship with the CPD cold case unit. And after these comments, there was no movement in the case. That other person was never a suspect, and those comments didn't change this. In 2017, Ron decided that enough was enough, and he filed a Freedom of Information request for his brother's files. He has said publicly that, although heavily redacted, he did find some information he thought was helpful. He also found that the DNA taken from the crime scene hadn't been processed, something he said needs to change. Ron wrote to the police superintendent and the mayor demanding that something be done, and those letters worked. In November of that year, Ron told the media that a cold case detective had been assigned to his brother's case, and that the same month, the CPD issued an alert, looking for more information and announcing that the case would be covered in an upcoming episode of Cold Files Chicago. Included in the alert was the sketch of Fernando. The detective assigned to the case was John Campbell. Ron is openly complimentary when speaking about John, and said he feels heard and that the case is being actively investigated. In 2019, the police announced that the FBI were running prints taken from the crime scene through a European database. They figured that since Fernando had an accent that may have been from Spain or Portugal, this would be a great way to go about it. Unfortunately, this line of inquiry didn't lead anywhere. Ron set up a Facebook page dedicated to finding his brother's killer called Finding Fernando. In August of 2020, the page received a message from a woman that said she had information. According to this woman, she thought she knew who had killed Kevin. Investigators followed up and found the information to be credible, as she knew details that hadn't been released to the public. As per the Unsolved Mysteries podcast, the person didn't feel comfortable speaking with police at first, so Ron was the go-between until they agreed to meet for an interview with investigators. The person had lived in Chicago as a child and knew a young gay man who was originally from Puerto Rico. The man was open about crimes that he had committed, robberies of men he had met while they were drunk, and once brazenly admitted that he had killed Kevin Clewer. And here's the kicker. The man often used different names. Although the tipster did admit that they couldn't recall him specifically using Fernando. The information provided led the police to a person who had been arrested for crimes similar to the ones described and whose mugshots from around the time of the murder resembled the sketch. The man in question left for his native Puerto Rico shortly after the sketch was released. So the investigators believed that they found Fernando. However, they didn't have enough evidence to proceed with an arrest. The friend who was with Kevin at the bar wasn't confident in his ability to pick Fernando out of a photo lineup since so much time had passed. He rightfully didn't want to make a false ID and accidentally implicate someone who was innocent. Although it's important to note that he was strongly leaning towards the photo of the man police believed was the Fernando. But without a positive ID from the photo lineup and no evidence linking Fernando to the crime, it was impossible to get a warrant to extradite Fernando from Puerto Rico. This was the key, the piece of the puzzle, and without it, the police's hands are tied. As recent as April of 2021, just 3 years ago, Ron participated in a press conference with Crime Stoppers. He said, "We're able to hopefully uncover some clues, some leads, some tips that could connect some of the dots. We're really looking for those magic tidbits of information that help bring together the various components." Police appealed to the public to come forward, saying that Fernando may have bragged about going to bars and picking up men who were intoxicated, going back to their places and robbing them. And yeah, they confirmed that his name wasn't Fernando, but they didn't release his real name, choosing instead to still refer to him by the pseudonym he gave Kevin and others. Ron told WIFR that the man in question may have gone by Francisco or Adolfo, but these names could also be pseudonyms. According to more recent reporting, Fernando may not have been working alone. Ron said, "The police do believe that this individual, along with a relation to him, were involved in Kevin's death. Witnesses had seen Kevin and Fernando walking towards Kevin's apartment, so it's not known when the other man may have joined them at the apartment. Ron thinks the men drugged his brother and then killed him during an attempted robbery." In addition to the family Facebook page, Ron runs a website called forchicagokev.com. The website has a photo gallery, links, family thoughts, news articles, and a page about Fernando. The website also has links for contact info if you have any tips. There's a $1,000 reward for information leading to an arrest. If you have information, you can leave an anonymous tip by calling Crime Stoppers at 1-800-535-STOP. Or you can call the Chicago Police, Area 3 Homicide at 312-744-8261.
Don't forget to follow us on all of our socials and subscribe today so you can listen ad-free and listen to our brand new journal entries series. And until then,
Stay safe.
bye.